How are you folks doing today?
Good, good. We can applaud.
Yay!
I don't like using the microphone, personally. So, thank you all for coming out. Before I get started with getting started, first thing I'll say is if you have any cell phones, electronic devices, anything like that, you could interrupt or go off. If we could put them on silent or turn them off, that is preferred. Otherwise, we'll do the accusing sidelong glance if it goes off. So obviously, we're here tonight to hear Josh Frank talk about his latest book, The Good Inn, collaboration with Black Francis and the illustrator Stephen Appleby. Very excited. Third book. And in addition to that, just in case you didn't know some of the other things that Josh does, over 200 interviews, prolific interviewer, producer, director, composer, owner of the Blue Starlight Drive-In here in town. Let's give him a big round of applause to come on up here and talk about The Good Inn. Josh Frank.
I wanted to sit in the audience so I could be considered a member of the audience, like a count, and have that extra person, because it always feels good. This is a nice little audience. You know, when you do a book, you're lucky to get 3 people to a book event. So when you have over 10, it's really exciting. So, and I would have been perfectly happy to have 2 because this is Austin, Texas, and this is where, if it wasn't for Austin, I would never have. I never would have done anything that I've done. I mean, I wouldn't have a drive-in movie theater that I opened here in town. I wouldn't have started a theater company when I moved here in '97, which basically being able to start this little theater company led to everything that happened that led to being able to write a book with my now close friend, Charles Thompson. So it's great to start out this little book tour I'm doing here in Austin. And thanks for coming. So, as you can see around you, there's a lot of pictures. These are Stephen Appleby's work. These are some of my favorite images I wanted to have out during the little thing that we're doing here. And I'm going to start out by reading the introduction, actually, to the book, which is the story of how the book came to be. Partly because I don't want to ruin the flow of the actual book so that when you read it, it's all surprises. I'm going to do a little excerpt from the actual book too. But I wanted to show you this one picture in particular. This one. So when I sat down with Black Francis at a cafe here in town, and he started telling me about his idea, which I'll tell you about a little more in detail when I read the introduction. He took out a napkin to try and explain his idea to me, and he basically drew that. And he said, huh? You see? I was like, yeah, totally, man, that's awesome. And that's what it started with. A line and real and unreal on the other side. And it all sort of bloomed out from there. And so I sent that napkin to Steve Appleby, and he did that. So that is the advanced version of the idea, which now is this. So I'll start by just reading the intro for you. How a book based on a soundtrack score that had not yet been composed about the first narrative pornographic movie for a feature film that did not yet exist came to be. Or Waiting for Gun Cotton. A few years ago, my friend Charles, aka Black Francis, aka Frank Black, frontman and founder of the band The Pixies, sat down with me at a little cafe on the east side of Austin, Texas. He was right in the middle of his Pixies Doolittle 20-year anniversary tour. I brought him here because the man loves all things French. This was the same guy who named his 4th Pixies album Trompe le Monde, after all, and who would find any excuse to get to Paris. So, being the Texas barbecue bread boy that I was, I had to do some serious research in order to find a passable French experience in a city that celebrated smoked brisket and ribs. As we took in the aroma of our espressos and the warm and inviting bistro vibe of the Blue Dahlia, and I gotta take a moment here to say that the Blue Dahlia is in no way passable. It's actually a really great French bistro here in town, and I was incredibly delighted to find it. And I got total brownie points because when I took Charles there, who's been to France many times, he found it authentic. I was sure that like whatever I found here in town would not do, but it was great, and it was a great discovery. I asked him what he wanted to do next. So Charles always had exciting projects in mind, and I was always into whatever cause he had and trying to help him with his ideas. So Charles and I had become friends over the years as my first two books concerned topics of interest to him. The first was a book about the Pixies, and the second a book about a man named Peter Ivers. He wrote the title song to the David Lynch movie Eraserhead. Peter Ivers did. And Peter was Charles was incredibly fascinated with Peter as well in his youth because of Eraserhead. Aside from affinity for France and making music, Charles always loved the cinema. Sitting in the cafe, he began to tell me about how he'd been struggling to find the right way to bring new Pixies material into the world after it had been absent for so long. He wanted to create something musically that was completely different and new. He felt that if a filmmaker would come along and ask his band to do a soundtrack for like some cool movie, that might be the answer. I had just finished telling him about my latest writing project. It was a puppet rock musical movie about a world where people lived symbiotic relationships with puppets by sharing their subconscious minds through a device called a flip chip.
Woo, woo, woo.
It was invented by a master puppeteer in a world that now hated puppets. So he was like really fascinated by this completely made up original world and all the possibilities of where you could take it. As the conversation progressed, he divulged that he actually had an idea for a film. It was the story of the first pornographic movie ever to include a narrative. He was inspired by this film he'd heard about called La Bonne Auberge, The Good Inn. Set in 1907, it had the meagerest of plots. A soldier goes to an inn and meets the daughter of an innkeeper, and they have lots of sex. Charles had become fascinated by the idea of filling in the blanks to the soldier's backstory. And in an early attempt to find new Pixie-ish inspiration, he had actually recorded a few demo songs pertaining to the story, describing it as sort of a soundtrack song cycle about a character simply named Soldier Boy. It was at this point that I interrupted him and said, "Wait a minute, you mean you've already started writing the soundtrack to this movie?" From there, everything kind of started falling into place. Charles, why not write the soundtrack to the movie first? Who says you can't write the music before there's actually a movie to score? If you want to make a movie, you should start with what you know how to do best, and that's music. So there's a moment of silence while Charles mulled this over, and then he asked me to help him write it. "Write what?" I asked. "Our movie," he responded. Now, we both took a moment of silence to contemplate the exchange that had just occurred, and he asked me what else I'd been up to. And I told him that I had recently, by chance, invented and opened the world's first mini urban drive-in movie theater, which I'd built in a back alleyway on the east side of Austin. We projected on the wall of a church led by a mariachi band. Charles lit up like the sun. "Wait a minute, you have your own movie theater?" In the purest form, this is Charles. Getting excited about a little oddball thing and then being so fascinated to the point where he would request that I take him to see it after the show. So it was 11:30 p.m. on a Thursday night, and I picked Charles up in the back of the theater where he was performing Doolittle in Austin. With a 2-hour window before his bus left for the next stop on the tour, we drove across town and pulled into the alley of the Blue Starlight, my 20-car drive-in movie theater. I flipped the power switch, and the lights illuminated around the little back alley drive-in, turning the dark east side lot into the tiny cinematic wonderland I had described to him. Charles was thrilled. I switched on the projector, and the vintage drive-in movie theater ad started playing on the wall that I had painted with a fairly authentic-looking drive-in movie screen. We just sat there until he had to leave, talking about movies, how he'd always dreamed of having his own movie theater. In retrospect, it really was the perfect start to this project. I discovered later during my research for the book that George Méliès had one of the first outdoor movie theater spaces in Paris back before the great movie palaces sprang up and left him and his work in their shadows. Charles loves movies, movie theaters, and music, and man, does this man love France. So, in many ways, The Good Inn is the ultimate love letter to all the things that fascinate him. So how did it become a book? Following a few of our brainstorming sessions, I called up Stephen Appleby, who did the very cool rocket drawings for the cover of the Pixies' 5th album, and I asked him if he would do some illustrations to help us with our movie pitch. How cool would it be, I thought, to have the illustrator for Trompe le Monde storyboard our movie? Appleby jumped on board and began drawing away, and Charles loved every panel he created. That's when the idea of an illustrated novel based on our screenplay idea came about, and thus the book that I hold in my hand came to be. Over the next year, we delved deeper into the history books to find anything and everything we could about the Good Inn and the men who first got their hands on a moving picture camera. We wanted to know how these very early blue movies were made. As you can imagine, they were not considered national treasures or important French history. Many of them, including The Good Inn, were lost in time except for like a few film frames. One thing that seemed to happen frequently was that popular early pornographic films were remade and then renamed to the point where it was nearly impossible to track down their origins. There are actually a few versions of The Good Inn that are described on the web, but the only moving images we uncovered were from a remake. This is available to watch online. The one still image that we were able to find depicting what we believe was the style and feel of the original film is also there, and it's actually in that frame on the far right there. As Charles described this image, it's strangely innocent. The actors don't seem self-assured in the least. They almost look like deer in headlights. They're not acting. It's almost as if it is real. The remake depicts a musketeer and is full of lighthearted sexual innuendos. This is more in line with later pornographic films, which would have been far more assured of themselves than, say, the first narrative pornographic film ever shot. This was an exciting discovery, but also very frustrating, as we were hoping to see the original film that we were creating this entire world around. So I switched gears to try and find as many books about the first pornographic filmmakers as I could. I quickly discovered that there were none. Another setback for sure. So I decided to concentrate on learning everything I could about legitimate filmmakers of this time period, basically 1882 to 1915, and to see whether within their stories there were any hints or clues about their peers who might have made a movie like The Good Inn and other films like it. And that's exactly where I found them, hidden in the paragraphs of other people's stories. So I told Charles my discovery, and soon he was sending me articles, biographies of French actors, artists, terrorists, politicians, producers, and directors that at some point or another had crossed paths with the same strange lost or buried names who in part created the first blue movies. As a result of all this detective work, many of the events that take place in The Good Inn are actually culled from real events in history. A number of actual people were also used as templates for characters, such as our antagonist, Lear, whose history in film and on this planet is fairly well documented up until the early 1900s, when all mention of him mysteriously come to a halt. It's as if he just vanished or was erased in time. Based on historical research, we figured that, to the best of our ability, the most likely scenario for what we felt would or could have happened to these people. Similarly, while many of the linking narrative elements are clearly inventions of creative interpretation and made up to tell the story that we wanted to tell, they're based on actual historical truths, such as our female protagonist, Nikki Wiley, who is in part based on Louise Wiley, a performer in the Peep Shows, as well as Louise Weber, a can-can dancer at the Moulin Rouge, and a muse of the artists of Paris. As well, we made occasional historical guesses and mixed science fact with a shot or two of science fiction, and after 2 years we had completed the narrative. When people ask me what it's like, I describe it as Gone with the Wind of French cinema's blue movie history, if it was written by the Pixies and directed by David Lynch and Terry Gilliam. Above all else, Charles is a storyteller. Not just a storyteller, but a collector of stories. A real honest-to-goodness modern-day troubadour wandering through this dimension, collecting the oddest oddball stories and turning them into rock and roll. I grew up listening to his 2 to 3 minute musical tales surrounded tightly by clustered atoms of quiet to cool to loud choruses of entire worlds that left my friends' imaginations, as well as my own, spinning with images of aliens on lonely highways. There were proud Spanish dancers in seedy bars, monkeys going to the eternal kingdom, and biblical bloodbaths that somehow seemed sexy. I always wondered what this man would do if he had more than 3 minutes to tell a story. And through our collaboration, now I know. Charles did end up writing new material for the Pixies, released in part over 2013 and currently still releasing new material. A few of the songs' main hooks were actually repurposed from instrumentals from the original recording sessions for the Good In demo that Charles, Joey, and David created together. 7 of the Good In demo song lyrics were used as inspiration for this book and are musical scene centerpieces in the narrative. What follows is an illustrated novel based on an in-the-works soundtrack for a feature-length film that is yet to be made about the first narrative pornographic movie ever made. And now, without further ado, let's dim the lights in the theater. I'm very proud to present to you my film, The Good In. So if I could bring my dear friend Rebecca up here, we're gonna do a little excerpt. Rebecca is my longtime dear friend, and also she has been my personal editor for 2 books now? 2 books. So if it wasn't for her, half the book would be completely misspelled. And really it probably wouldn't make much sense. And my father, who is here tonight, is very appreciative of Rebecca, because since I found her, I no longer needed to send all of my manuscripts to him. So, teamwork. All right. So, just going to read a couple of pages selected from 2 scenes from the book, just to give you an idea. And the first is the prologue. It's the very beginning. We good? Okay. Prologue. An old Navy training film scratches its way to life in black and white. A gruff, middle-aged officer appears, his thinning hairline and tight face positioned directly towards the camera as he commences his lecture. There he is. This picture's. Officer. We're now going to demonstrate the safe use and storage of nitrocellulose, also known as gun cotton. This compound is extremely volatile, which is why it is primarily used as an explosive material in weaponry. Notably, it is also used as a film base for the new moving picture industry. Be aware that this type of material should always be stored with extreme care, as it is highly flammable and can cause severe bodily harm. To prove his point, the officer strikes a long match and lights the film reel on fire and drops it into a large transparent container. The reel flares up and explodes with a white-hot flash as the chemicals in the emulsion feed on the air and flame, and continues to emit noxious flames and smoke as he continues. Officer. This chemical reaction also produces deadly fumes that will kill you. If you find yourself in close proximity to nitrocellulose-based materials and intense heat or flame, we can only recommend that you run like hell. Another picture. The reel ends, blasting the screen an unearthly white as the film flaps lazily against the back of the humming projector. Pigalle District, Paris, 1929. Interior projection booth, night. The ancient film projector sits in a grain projection booth that has clearly seen better days. Tattered movie posters and cling desperately to the walls, and stacks of old film reels balance on top of one another. An old man shaking hands extract the Navy training film from the dusty sprockets with a projection wheel as he flips the off switch as his young projectionist protege watches. Old projectionist. It is a lonely dead man's profession with an uncertain future. If I were you, I'd join the Navy. At least it has a slightly better death rate than sitting in this perch. The old man hobbles away, shutting the door and causing the thin walls to rattle. The young man's face follows the dusty reel as it falls off and makes its way towards the ground from the now broken shelf on the wall. He picks it up and studies it. Across the cover in faded script, the label reads, "Warning, nitrate film, highly combustible." The boy opens the canister, threads the film into the projector, and proceeds to flip the switch. Click, click, click. The projection light bursts bright with a blinding white explosion, and angelic, otherworldly voice singing over the white sings.
Of died, he sang a little song, I sang along. It's from a film about an inn that he was in. And as with life there was a plot, but not a lot. Get to the chorus, she's waiting there for us. This is just the chorus, and we're just the choral ode. Oh, thank you.
Okay, and now we're moving to a slightly different part of the book. One other little scene. Soldier Boy reaches the door. A small, torn, and hastily drawn poster reads, "Live Girls in Only Flesh," and in small print below it, with Nikki Wiley's Dancing Girls. Looking back down the alley to where he came from, a small army of soldiers are running towards him. They're shouting and pursuing him. Soldier Boy pushes the alleyway door open and goes inside. Interior backstage show palace scene. It is dark and warm, and Soldier Boy stumbles, reaching out for something to get his bearings. His hands grab onto curtains, and he carefully pulls them apart, revealing another, much smaller theater. This venue has clearly seen better days. It's falling apart, actually. In the audience sits one man watching the stage. Soldier Boy watches as 5 naked women stand silently in front of the virtually empty house and its rickety rows of old empty seats. One of the women timidly steps forward and speaks for the others.
What about the music?
Club owner. What about music?
What are we to dance to?
The club owner looks up at her disgusted, and then he begins to clap his hands together. Through the slit in the curtain, Soldier Boy watches transfixed. A pretty young girl steps up next to him and stares out numbly at the scene. She whispers as they both watch.
She's prepared now for the dancing, but he isn't even glancing. She requests a little music, but he says, please no excuses. That's how you get your chance, Sonny, working for Mr. Milk and Honey.
Soldier Boy. Why do you do it?
A girl has got to eat. Some folk have brains or brawn. We've got curves and feet.
The young dancer takes Soldier Boy's hand.
Come on.
Soldier Boy, where are we going?
You're here to see her, aren't you?
She leads him farther backstage to a ladder that ascends towards a loft above.
She's up there. She doesn't dance anymore. She can't. She's probably older than you remember. Try not to be disappointed. They all come looking for her. So don't mind what they find, as long as they can say they had their night with Nikki Willie. But hurry, she's already started her drink for the evening, so she won't be at her best for much longer.
The young dancer steps backwards and disappears. Soldier Boy begins to climb the ladder. Just as he peeks over the top, he sees the back of a woman sitting by candlelight at a vanity mirror. She's pouring a glass of dark liquid. Soldier Boy is yanked backwards off the ladder onto the floor. He looks up at a very angry club owner who grabs him by his jacket collar and throws him up against the crumbled brick wall. Club owner: "How many times do I have to tell you pricks that you gotta go through me? That's how it's gotta be, Sonny, dealing with Mr. Milk and Honey." Soldier Boy: "Sir, you're making a mistake. You're going to hit me, aren't you?" Soldier Boy, before he gets a chance to say another word, the club owner punches him square in the face. Exterior stage door, night. Soldier Boy is thrown headfirst back into the alley. The door slams behind him. Before he can start to collect his thoughts, he sees shadows of angry men running towards him, this time from the opposite direction. He runs back towards the alley entrance. He makes his way towards the stairs that lead back down to the river, barely able to see in front of him from darkness and blood gushing from the angry gash on his head, rudely interrupted from healing yet again. He reaches the alley's mouth and turns to see the gang of shadows chasing after him come into the moonlight, which now shines through the opening between the alley walls. They are all dressed like Tim. They are soldiers. He recognizes them. Leading the pack is a familiar face. Thank you. Oh, yes. Thanks for that. So, yeah. That's what I got for you. I wanted to read the intro to you because it's a really, how the project came about was, you write. I never thought I'd get to write 3 books. So after I wrote the first one, I was lucky because an idea came out of the first book that was strong. And it turned out being something I really cared about, this person, Peter Ivers. But after I wrote the second one, I was pretty sure that was it too, because, that's 2 books. It's pretty good, for someone who never thought they'd write a book in their life. But the second book was a very intense experience, and I really just didn't think that another idea would come that was worth spending 2 or 3 years on. And I pretty much thought that was it. So when Charles came to me with this idea, and I went home and started looking up this history, it was sort of like a rabbit hole thing. And I just feel very lucky that I was able to discover yet another lost world to be able to create a book around, because there's so few lost worlds left to find, and so yeah. So the story is a fictional tale, but it's very much based on some crazy lost history around the film world, and I think you'll enjoy the book if you pick it up. Were there any questions?
I was curious. I went to enjoyed your Peter Ivers book a lot. I haven't read your Pixies book.
Oh, thanks.
That's a great book. And then I went to yet an event with some Black Francis artwork and the score he did for the silent film The Golem.
Yes.
Back when you
Yes.
first had opened the drive-in.
Yeah. He did a new soundtrack. Yeah.
Which is awesome. I
Yeah.
like that CD.
Yeah.
But was that any sort of springboard for this project? Just the silent cinema aspect and the fact that you seem to somehow be involved in, if not the genesis of that Golem thing, at least in the getting the word out about it. And
Yeah. Well, my second play that I wrote here in Austin, like in 99 or 98, was a sort of interpretation of the Golem play. And so when I read in the paper that he was adapting that, we weren't really, we were yet to be really, close friends, but we were sort of, we just kind of kept in touch. And I got in touch with him because I was so excited that he was doing that. and he invited me to the premiere of it in San Francisco. And that's where we sat down afterwards and first really started talking about movies. And I hadn't even opened my drive-in yet, or it was like a couple years before, and I got really excited about the fact that he was into that kind of stuff and was doing something with multimedia, and from sitting down at that after the premiere, which was at the San Francisco Film Festival, at a theater kind of like the Paramount here, actually, it's beautiful. We just started talking. That was like the first time we had that sort of like, well, I have this idea and I have this idea, and he had just finished. Bluefinger had just been released, which is this great album based on the life of Herman Brood. Once again, just an oddball guy that he became fascinated with, wrote an album about. And to me, his Bluefinger album was in a way a template for this, because it was a song cycle with each song kind of being a story connected to this central character. And so when we were sitting there at the Golem thing, I told him I had a friend in Houston that had a theater company called, it used to be called Infernal Bridegroom, but now it's called the Catastrophic Theater, and they're sort of like the Salvage Vanguard of Houston. And I said, I'm not doing theater anymore, as much, and I'm not really connected. I don't think I could. I'd love to turn Bluefinger into a musical stage thing, but I actually know this guy in Houston that I think could do a really good job with it. Would you want me to hook you guys up? And so that's where this sort of starting to co-collaborate started, because I hooked them up and then I became involved, in sort of a middleman for that synergy. And so that sort of sealed the deal, I think, on the idea that maybe we would find something that we could do together someday. And after seeing the Golem, in my head it was always it's going to be something multimedia, it's going to be something with music and with movies. And so when he said he had a movie idea, I got really excited about it. So yeah. But if you haven't seen the Golem movie, it's the original silent Golem film that Frank Black, that's what he was calling himself when he did the Golem, he did a whole new score for it, and it's really cool. And you can actually get a DVD of it, I believe through like on Amazon or anywhere. So yeah. That's it? Okay.
Well, tell us about the posters.
Oh, so yeah, well, very good. So, so these are poster prints from Applebee's work, and they're awesome. And these guys are throughout the book. There's parts of the book that are silent, that are actually silent film in a book. So my way of conveying that was to have, when a character speaks in the book, it's actually in the box. So that's what it looks like. And Stephen Appleby created these different boxes for the characters to speak at in the book. And and that's pretty much it with the posters. But I will tell you that this one and this one are my favorites. And then Steve Appleby's fantastic, and he's a big name in illustrations and drawings in the UK, and he does a weekly thing in the Guardian. And you can tell your friends that I'll be doing a book reading and event at this really cool place in LA on the 18th at Cinefamily. It's like a really cool movie theater, kind of like, it's not like the Alamo. It's sort of a hybrid, I guess, of Alamo stuff and Violet Crown stuff. It's very cool. and that's on Friday the 18th. So if you have any other questions that you want to ask, like without other people around, I will be here. I'll sign books. Yes, Rebecca.
Since now there's a book that is a screenplay with a soundtrack, are you going to make a movie?
That is a really good question, Rebecca.
Thank you, just thought of it.
And that wasn't even planned. Yeah, no, that's the plan. We have been debating whether we want to just do it really indie ourselves, or whether we want to, like, you know, take meetings. You know?
Michael Bay. Michael Bay.
Yeah, I mean, I've taken a lot of meetings in my life so far, and I don't like taking meetings because meetings just make you feel like you need to take more meetings, and then that's all you do. So we've been talking about doing it a different way, but I'm going to LA next week, so I'm taking some meetings. So yeah, so that's what we're working on now, and we're currently. The idea was, let's do the book and then we'll adapt that into the screenplay, and it'll sort of be halfway there because it's sort of partly in screenplay format. So we're now sort of reconstructing it for the movie version, and we're having fun with that. So.
Who would be your dream team of director and actors?
Well, Charles kind of has it in his mind that he wants to direct it. So that's cool with me. And no, I think he could. I mean, he knows exactly what he wants, and so that could work. But no, I mean, I guess a dream would be to get David Lynch, you know, interested in directing it. I sent him a copy of the book. I got to meet him for my second book, so still have his address. And I thought it would be cool to have Danger Mouse produce the soundtrack, and Charles thought that was a cool idea too. So we're sending a copy to him. So those are some of them. There's been a lot. You know, that's one of the things you do when you're thinking of making a movie. You're like, I would want this and this guy, and wouldn't it be cool if this and that? So yeah, so that's those are some of the ideas that we've had for that.
It seems like I read in a, I don't know if I call it a press release, but the event announcement for tonight that you were going to play some recordings or
Yes,
something?
we sang them instead.
You sang them instead?
It was a test, because this is the first night. I wanted to see if it was more natural to do it that way as opposed to just sitting there listening to something. And also, I am working with Charles to try and figure out a way to present some of the demo stuff, like, in a good way, you know, like, and that's my hope is that we're gonna maybe get like somehow get some of the ideas of the songs out for people to hear. So if people are interested, then hopefully that'll happen.
Are you going to do it as a play?
Well, that's another interesting thought that whenever me and Charles sits down and he's had 2 or 3 Prosecco's, we start talking about really, wouldn't it be cool if, hey, why don't we, and then the next day he doesn't remember any of the things he suggested, but I'm already well on my way to trying to make them happen. And he's like, whoa, we talked about that? I'm like, yeah, man, you said we should do that. So I've got these guys, but that was something that we talked about in passing, the idea, he really wants this to be very authentic. That's part of the reason I've stopped taking meetings, because we would take some meetings with we got to sit down with Judd Apatow, and because he's a fan, and it was great. It was like, wow, this is great. I can't believe we got a meeting, with and Charles like, here's the thing, the whole thing has to be in French, and I was just like. there goes the meeting. And so, yeah. I forgot what the point of was that because what was
A play.
the play? Yeah. So the whole point of that is that there's lots of different. So one of his ideas. Oh yeah, I know why I mentioned that story. Not just because I find it really funny, but is that he shortly after that meeting, we were sitting there. He's like, "What if we found a French theater company to adapt it as a theater play?" And I'm like, "That's a good idea." So like, and we could bring it to the U.S. and we could have English subtitles, like in the opera. He's like, no subtitles. Like, well, but how will people understand what's going on? He's like, it's just going to be in France for French people. So that's what we're dealing with here with the whole movie thing. It's gonna happen, but it might be in French, you might not know what's going on, and that'll just be how it is. But it will be authentic. And but I mean, I joke about it, but because he was so serious about it being authentic, there might be a couple of mistakes on things, but it's pretty. I did a lot of work to make sure that the story was legit and historically accurate. Thanks, my wife. Ladies and gentlemen. Yes, before it becomes a movie, it's quite possible that there'll be some little article in the Chronicle saying that Black Francis is staging his book that's a movie as a French opera or something.
Do you think we have time for maybe 2 more questions?
Okay, quick one. Considering the content of the book, the material being of a pornographic nature, where would you place this book on a scale from 1 through 10? Lewdness factor? Number 1 being Muppet Babies. Number 10 being like a Hulk Hogan sex film.
Was there one?
Yes.
Really?
Yeah,
Oh.
it's pretty bad.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it's not a pornographic book is the thing. It's really, that wasn't the point. It's about the people that made it, and it's not, it's not. Yeah. So I would say, just simply because of the subject matter, maybe it's like a 4.
I'll take it.
So yeah, I mean, there is one picture in which you kind of see genitalia, but
blown up.
kind of.
Is the one blown up?
Oh yeah, it's an upside down genitalia.
Oh.
So, but it's a cartoon, But yeah, when it was first announced that we were doing this, like Spin Magazine is right, Black Francis writes porn, and it's not what it is. It's a very serious piece of literature. Thanks for coming, everybody. Really appreciate it.